If you do any prospecting with LinkedIn, you have got to go get set up with Surf. That's SURFE. It's a tool you can use to add new contacts to your CRM system directly from LinkedIn in seconds. I'm using it every single day. I add contacts, follow my deals, keep track of notes, and it ends up saving me a bunch of time on prospecting and outreach, which means I can spend more time moving my deals along. The data is always 100% accurate since I don't have to copy and paste all the fields over from each and every contact that I want to put in my CRM. Instead, Surf does that all automatically with just one click in about 60 seconds. The team over at Surf has put together a very special offer for fans of sales players. There's a link down in the show notes, and you can use the promo code JWSurf5. Don't forget the E at the end of Surf. That's JWSurf5 for 5% off your first year. Don't spend another minute doing things manually. Go get set up with Surf. All right, I'm excited to introduce yet another fantastic guest on the show today. Her name is Lauren Flannery. Lauren is the Senior Manager of Enablement for the Sales and Success teams at Whoop. She's based in Austin, Texas, and she and I actually go back a number of years. We're former colleagues. I invited Lauren on for a few different reasons. First of which is her background. She transitioned out of the hospitality industry into SaaS sales. And the way that she did that, I think, is among the best stories I've heard in my career. She actually parlayed her experience in hotel management to then get a job at a company, a SaaS company that sells to hotels and hospitality. Beyond that, she's got some very interesting perspectives into the sales enablement world. She's been able to carve out an amazing career, starting as an SDR and then moving into sales enablement. She has some great insights on current trends, data, and some things in the industry that I think you should be thinking about. Lastly, we talk a little bit about how to empower more women in SaaS sales. Overall, this was an amazing conversation, and I can't wait to share it. With that said, welcome, Lauren. All right, we are live. Lauren, welcome to the SaaS Sales Players.
Hi, thanks, Jesse. Happy to be here.
Of course. Thanks for coming on. I'm super excited to share your story because I know a little bit about it. And just for some context for the listeners, Lauren is a former colleague of mine. We work together. And so I know a lot about her, and I wanted her to come on the show because I think she has some really interesting perspectives on the industry, on career paths in the industry. And she is actually in sales enablement. So I've wanted to for a long time have someone come on the show and talk about the role of sales enablement. And the reason for that is because I think sales enablement has some really unique insights into how to get better at things in the industry and what the trends are and some things like that. So I want to start off with, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you end up in the tech sales world? Where'd you come from? All that good stuff. Wherever you care to start, take it away.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good way to start too, since it kind of explains how you and I know each other. Right. Having worked together, not nearly long enough, but
right. Okay.
Maybe again one day soon.
I hope so.
But yeah, I actually started out my career working in hotels. So I grew up my entire life around a hotel family, everybody working for the most part for Marriott, and grew up shadowing and going in whenever I could and doing internships and going to hospitality school. And I kind of thought, this is what I'm doing with my life. And got out of college, did that for about a year, working for Four Seasons, and had a great experience. But I found myself a year in not knowing why it didn't feel right and not knowing what I wanted to do next, which of course is an awful identity crisis to have in your early 20s. And I ended up calling a mentor of mine who was a professor at the hospitality school, actually. And one of the first things she told me to do was to list out 10 things that were the most important to me in finding a new career and what I wanted also my life around that career to look like. And I remember at the time, I could not think big. I was looking at very small things like, I would love to have weekends off and I would love to not work on holidays, which at the time, those were huge for me. Right. But she really challenged me and was like, think about the most ridiculous thing you could think of. What if 10 years from now, you were doing really well in this new industry and you could ask for whatever you wanted? what's something that's absolutely ridiculous? And the
You're
best
like,
thing
weekends off.
yeah, I said to her, I said, I would love to bring my dog to work. And out of
Oh,
all things, that was the one that I was so excited about. And she said, okay, write it down. And I remember saying, you're ridiculous. I'm not writing that down. That's never going to happen.
wow.
Yeah. And cut to, a few months later, I was working in a dog friendly office and being able to work from home every once in a while, these things that were so ridiculous to me at the time. So I laugh about it now.
That is a great story, and it's a lot of perspective for me and anyone who's been in the industry for a while, because I think I don't even realize how good I have it. Because
Yeah.
I mean, I was in a different industry for a very, very short amount of time before for a very short amount of time before I got into tech sales. And, those kind of perks and things like that have been around me for a long time, but it is a great perspective that some of the, benefits of being in the tech space are, far beyond what you could even imagine in another career field, like being able to bring your dog to work or work from home or, make a certain amount of money or whatever that like perk is or that benefit is. So that is a really great story. So you wrote that down, and then what happened? Yeah. How did you take action on, the goal of bringing your dog to work?
Yeah. Well, and again, like it's something that we can laugh at, and it's funny, but at the time, it was so important to me.
Like
And there's certain things like
far-fetched. Yeah.
that. Yeah, so far fetched. And it's interesting too to have the contrast where I talk to my family that's still in the hotel industry, and there are things that are just different to them and that are more important to them. And they don't want to take their dog to work. It's a very different experience. So I think it's also just about knowing, it's not that one thing is better than the other. It's what's right for
Yeah.
you. And as
Yeah.
we continued our conversations and I realized I wanted to get into tech and I wanted to get into sales, I really got my first lesson in prospecting, in kind of interviewing and selling what I could bring to a company. When I was going through the interview process, I applied to, I think the grand total came out to 52 jobs at different
No
companies.
way.
And
52?
52, and I heard back from one, and it was you at Medallia.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Uh,
I took a hard look at what the difference was. And again, that was my very first lesson, and didn't really know it at the time,
yeah.
where every one of those 51 that I had applied to, I was just talking about myself or sending my resume, didn't know anything about the company, didn't really understand the role, which it is also hard when you're outside of the tech industry to understand the language and the lingo and what the role might be. But I didn't do any of that work. And with Medallia, I had used the product. I was really passionate about it. And that was very clear in the conversations. And even just in that initial application, I was talking more about the role and the company than
Yeah.
about myself.
That is so cool. So I realize, and I think I told you this off the air, that I talk about your story a lot, like all the time. I have quite a few people that listen to the show reach out and say, how do I even get started getting into tech? There's so many tech companies. There's so many like categories within SaaS. I don't know how to build the skills. I don't know this or that. And I usually reference, your story, which is, is there any SaaS companies that you've ever used in another role? And if you're coming
Yeah.
from, hospitality or banking or something, you've probably used some piece of SaaS. You've probably used SaaS if you even worked in a coffee shop, because you might be using, like Square or something, or some other payment processing system. If you worked in legal, you probably use this. So like start there and figure out
Yeah.
if you have some natural interest and background. I think that's that's a really cool way to leverage the fact that you'd use the platform. What I recall from the conversations when you were coming in at Medallia was it really stood out that you had used the platform, you understood how it worked, and you understood how it added value. And that was clearly communicated. And I think it's really cool that you picked up on the fact that like, oh, if I just talk about what I know and how I can, contribute to the fact, like, it's such a great story. It's such a great story, which is I can come in and speak from firsthand experience that I know this platform's great and here's how it can be used for practical problems. Right. So that's so awesome. I talk about it all the time to people. I say, just what do you know? What do you know about that you can,
Yeah.
and what have you used? And I was just recently talking to someone who's like, well, I know a lot about Shopify. I use Shopify. Cool. Go and see if there's opportunities at Shopify, start there, start networking there. So I think the way that you went about that is really amazing. And I want to ask, so did that, I imagine it continued to pay off for you. We didn't work together very long at Medallia, but did that story resonate with people you talked to on the prospect and customer side that, hey, I used to use this. You should talk to me because I used to use this and I can tell you how we used it. Did that work?
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's so interesting too, because I feel like there are two camps where some people really don't mind. They could go in and sell any product, or they don't need to be working for a company that fits their interests. For me, that's always been really important. And I think to your kind of question and thought around how do you break into the tech industry, I think it's knowing what those things are about yourself. Like, I always knew, okay, if I leave the hotel industry, I want to be selling something that I know and I've used and I'm passionate about and I care about. And yet I applied to 51 jobs that probably had nothing to do with anything that I cared about at all. And it's something that I tell people now, even that are still trying to get into the tech industry. What are you passionate about? What do you care about? What are your hobbies? Because they're, like you said, there is a SaaS company for everything nowadays. And if you are the friend of mine that won't shut up about dogs and is so passionate about dogs, there's companies for that, and there's software for vets, and there's, so many different opportunities. And I think we're just engineered to kind of think we have to fit into the role or the company, and they're interviewing us and we have to fit into what they want, versus how do I kind of qualify them too and find what's the right fit for me.
Right. Were you pretty close to just giving up? I mean, 50, you said it was 52, 51, 50 plus, let's just say 50 plus, applications, and finally hearing back after that many. Were you pretty close to just saying, maybe I ought to just stick in the hotel industry?
Yes and no. I was definitely exhausted, and there were many times when I wanted to just throw my hands up in the air and say, this is never going to happen for me. I think also because it's kind of like prospecting. Like I said, it because I was just doing this high volume effort to get anything out there, cranking out my resume, cranking out applications that meant absolutely nothing to me. That's exhausting to do, versus the time that I spent on the Medallia application was so much more because I was interested in it and it was exciting and it was fun for me. And those were kind of the moments that I realized, okay, that's where I need to, if this doesn't work out with Medallia, that's what I need to shoot for again. And, that's going to be a lot of work, but it'll be worth it because it's somewhere that I'll stay longer, and not just be hopping around.
I've never really heard that said out loud before, but what I know, this is what I do personally, and I'll share that when I'm really interested in a company, I put a ton of work into the interview. I treat it like a full-time job, which is hard if you already have a full-time job and you're pursuing something. But I will literally treat it like a full-time job. I once spent—
get obsessed.
I once spent I think probably 30 hours in a week putting together a presentation for a demo. It was the demo stage of the interview where they wanted me to demo the product and present on it. And I put so much work into understanding as much as I could. And the product was behind it was behind a paywall. I couldn't do a trial of it. It was, an enterprise product, but I went and read reviews on Capterra and Trust Radius and G2 Crowd and figured out what people were saying about it. I took screenshots from their website to be able to show it in a PowerPoint. So I do the same thing when I interview for roles. Once I know I'm interested in working for a company, I pretty much put a good amount of eggs in that basket. Now I diversify a little bit, but I really do put a ton of time into preparing for those interviews. So I think that's really great advice you just gave, which is, once you've latched on to that company that you think is going to be the one that's going to help you take off, and in your case, it absolutely has, how do you, then put the right amount of investment into it in terms of time and preparation for each of those steps? It's just like sales though, too, which is really cool because you can apply that same methodology to closing deals. When you put a bunch of effort into researching a prospect, preparing resources, getting ahead of every step of the process, and coming in with your A game, you're going to close more deals that way too. So it's complementary. They're complementary skill sets. And I think it's cool that you called that out, because I'd never really heard anyone else say that before, that that's the amount of effort they put into it.
Yeah. And I like the way that you talked about, I mean, you obviously know yourself very well too, to say, hey, when I'm going through that, this is the amount of hours that I spend, and I get obsessed with it. And that was actually one of the things that my professor, Lydia, some of the advice that she gave me when we were going through this whole process together was to start noticing almost your tells of what gives you energy, what you're passionate about. And I think it's so important overall to have a mentor that knows you very well and can call you out and be very honest with you. And one of the first things she told me was, one of your tells when you are very excited about something, you talk really fast. And it wasn't, feedback or criticism like, hey, slow yourself down. It was, hey, start paying attention to when, whether it's a company or even in your current role. It's something I still do to this day. When I get off a meeting and I realize, wow, I was just firing through that information. I was so excited. I was talking so fast. I start to pay attention to those things and can kind of see where my passions gravitate towards or where my strengths are because of that. So I think it's really key to know what those tells are, what you get really obsessed and excited about.
Yeah, that's great. A little, just a flag or an indicator, a leading indicator of what might be interesting. So tell us about what, you came into a role at Medallia. What were you doing? And talk to us a little bit about what you've done since then in terms of what you did at Medallia. And then, I know you're not there anymore, but you're working on something different. Give us an idea of what kind of work you've done and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I came into Medallia as an SDR, and I was very clear when I came in. I probably said to you and several others, I loved management and leadership in my hotel experience, and I would love to grow in some sort of leadership track with this SDR role one day. And I ended up getting an opportunity to be a team lead and then ultimately an SDR manager. And I think being on that leadership team, the time that I was an SDR manager was really transformative for me. Again, to know what was important to me, what was giving me energy, and what I was really passionate about. And I started noticing that I enjoyed certain components of leadership, and it was all gravitating towards enablement. So when I started seeing that, again, I think it's so important to have that self-awareness, and I think it's really undervalued from a career perspective. Everybody talks about self-awareness outside of work, but having the self-awareness to know, hey, I really care about certain components of this role right now, and that's not to say I'm going to neglect other components, but what is that telling me? And I remember I talked to an old colleague of mine who was a mentor at Four Seasons, actually, and she was in learning and development. And I talked to her once I came over to sales enablement, and I said, how crazy is this? I'm now in the same type of world as you, and who would have ever thought? And she kind of said to me, she was like, well, yeah, it was kind of obvious. You always gravitated towards this sort of stuff, even when you weren't in tech sales. Yeah. So it was really cool to kind of then reflect on everything that was leading up to, okay, I've always been gravitating towards this. And again, it was kind of important for me to say, okay, I do want to pay attention to what those things are that I do really care about and I'm passionate about from now on. And at the same time, I saw certain things that needed to be done for enablement for the team that I was working with as a manager, and just started filling some of those gaps. And I think that's the way that I've seen a lot of my peers promoted to, is just seeing a challenge, seeing a gap, filling it, starting to take on that role. And then, sometimes if you're lucky, the role will be created for you, and you'll move on to that team. And that's what I was fortunate enough to have happen to me, and how I got into enablement. So I spent some time in enablement at Medallia before coming over to my current role.
Yeah. And so I mentioned kind of in the preface of the episode that I don't think I've ever had a sales enablement, professional or leader on my show yet. So I have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And to be completely transparent, in the big scheme of things, I'm relatively new to sales enablement because I've mostly worked for pretty early stage startups, with the exception of Medallia. And of course, where I'm at now, I haven't worked a lot with sales enablement. So now that I am in a role where we do have sales enablement, I see the value. I see that, there's trends, there's tactics and strategies as well, and some different things that you have insights into that you can dedicate, full time to, because you're not carrying a quota. And that's the world I've lived in for the last however many years. Is I didn't get a lot of enablement because in an early startup, when you're a rep, you might have a VP of sales or a manager over you. That person's also carrying a number and putting out, 10,000 fires as part of their role. And unfortunately, sales enablement goes by the wayside because a lot of people will say, well, hold on, Jesse, we've got to first get consistent, predictable revenue. then we'll invest in a sales enablement leader to come in and help us fine tune everything. And that's really the reality I've lived most of my career in. So I'm happy now to be in a role where I have that, we have that investment. I'm able to, benefit from that as a seller and get that access. But the question I had for you is, how can I, as a rep who's new to working with sales enablement, or even if I was a rep that had worked with sales enablement my whole career, what are some best practices for how I can take advantage of that resource?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's an interesting time too. There's such a wide scope to enablement these days. So first, I would say ask your enablement team, be honest with them. Like I kind of view myself as a translator of sorts.
Oh, I like
But
that.
yeah, no, but I think any enablement professional would. So I think asking them and just having honest conversations with them and asking the question that you did is a great start. But from my perspective, I think the biggest pitfall is to diminish it just down to training. Like there's just this umbrella term that
Yes.
sales enablement is training, right? Yeah. And I think that really hinders what you can do together, what you can accomplish. And I think the best way to translate what you need to sales enablement is to start backwards. So instead of starting with the training topic, like a lot of people will come and say, this is a topic I want to cover, start with the outcome or what you want to accomplish in your terms, right? So a great example of this that I love to use is if you're thinking, hey, Lauren, I'm going to come to you, I'm going to come to enablement and ask for cold call training. The first question
Yeah.
that I'm going to ask you is why, right? Because that could be everything from how to teach SDRs to use the sales tools and get the right phone numbers, to how to conduct research, to what time do you call people? Are we
Right.
calling the right people? And then getting into the meat of an opening, handling certain objections, closing on the phone. There's so many different components that if you come to me and say cold call training, I'm
Yeah.
going to think all of that, right? Versus if
Right.
you
Right.
come to, yeah, if you come to me and you say, hey, Lauren, my SDRs are getting the right phone numbers clearly, they're getting people on the phone. They have the right messaging in terms of getting past the opener and handling certain objections, and they're actually closing and booking meetings, but those meetings keep getting rescheduled or pushed or ghosted
Ooh.
or canceled.
Yeah.
That is a
Very
very
different
different conversation,
for
right?
sure.
Yeah. So I think that shows the importance of flipping topic to outcome. Otherwise, our expectations are way off of each other, right? Because you're going to come back to me and say, Lauren, I asked for a cold call training and none of those meetings are holding still. So what was the whole point of that?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. That's deep. And I do agree that like a lot of us as sellers, we're used to flying at 30,000 feet. We're not used
Mm-hmm.
to coming down and breaking things out into like you're saying, breaking things out into buckets or segmenting different aspects of that process, right? We just
Mm-hmm.
think of things as cold calling, cold call training. It's a thing, right? It's not all these different aspects of it. There's not these different outcomes from it. And there's not that much that goes into it. At least that's what we think, right? But so it's cool to
Yeah.
hear that the perspective of enablement is more around the specialization and getting very granular on how to drive the results that you're looking for from, whatever inputs are required to do that. Very cool.
Yeah. And I think if you're not at that point where you can break down exactly which point we're seeing the gap in, again, just lean on what outcome you're trying to drive. Talk in your numbers and your metrics rather than the topic, because I think that's where the disconnect can be sometimes. Again, is if you're coming with, hey, can we have an enablement session on cold calling? You're just going to see a completely different result than if you said, hey, I don't know exactly what we need to fix it right now, but here's the problem.
Here's the problem.
And that's
Interesting.
where exactly here's where we can come in and help and figure out what the right training will be and what the right topics will be to drive the right change there.
Very cool. Do you work like in the work you've done as a sales enablement leader? Have you typically worked with reps individually, or has it more been team wide initiatives?
All of the above.
All of the above.
I love one-on-one coaching and conversations and shadowing. That's one going back to the things that give me energy and that I'm passionate about. I think especially in a position I'm in now and that I was in at Medallia and Enablement, being an individual contributor role, I know that I've loved some of those leadership aspects of mentoring. And so I do love that from that perspective. But then also I feel like that just gives you, it equips you with so much knowledge, being able to sit down with individual sellers on their calls and just learn what their day-to-day is,
Right.
and not just sellers, across the board, working with SDRs and CSMs, and really understanding what's important to them and what their pain points are day to day.
That brings up a really good point. Does sales enablement typically extend beyond, it sounds like it extends beyond just reps and SDRs. It goes into, I imagine, pre-sales and post-sales type roles as well. How about marketing? In your roles, have you done a lot to work with marketing? Tell us a little bit about that part of it.
Yeah, it's definitely evolving. When even just a few years ago, I mean, I haven't been doing sales enablement for too long. And when I first started, I feel like it was very focused on the SDR and AE role. And now it's really expanding into post sales. So customer success enablement is a huge topic right now.
Right.
Huge specialization. And I've even been getting into more of our CX and support teams. So really expanding into some other areas that we haven't done before.
That's really cool to hear. And I think from the time I started my SaaS career until now, the emphasis on growing existing customers has changed completely. When I started in SaaS, I guess almost 10 years ago now, it was all about net new logos, selling to net new people, new prospects. And over the course of, especially in the last 5 years, the emphasis has really gone from heavy, we want hunter mentality, 80% outbound, et cetera, to now, well, you can actually grow your existing relationships. So I think it's kind of cool to hear that you're also enabling the post-sales side of things, because once the sale's done, that's really when more selling can be enabled and more revenue can be generated from an existing customer who's already installed and just needs to grow their footprint with your software. So that's cool to hear.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's just so much to learn from your customer base too, that I think, like you said, there's an increased focus on that from, every side, including enablement, that we also selfishly want that wealth of knowledge that they have from being on the customer side. I think people are just seeing so much more value in that now, which is fantastic. They're some of the best teams to work with too.
So in your role, do you work with current customers to try to better understand pain points, what resonated, or is that a different function than sales enablement?
I don't personally. So typically that's, at least from who I've worked with, is more product marketing, and then our some of our customer facing teams. It is something I'm interested to see if the enablement world, as it's evolving, I think going from the scope of SDR, AE into more of these customer facing roles, it has stayed internal to my knowledge. I don't know if anybody is starting to expand into customer enablement. It's something that I've actually been thinking about and keeping track to see if anybody's starting to get into that. I could imagine that's maybe the next wave of enablement.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that'll be really interesting. I think now too, I'm going to share what's going on inside my brain these days is just with the world's going through a big change, obviously all kinds of different changes, I should say. And, I won't get into all the macroeconomic stuff and world global affairs stuff, but, specifically speaking to like the tech industry, we're obviously seeing a big shift in how things have been over the last 10 years, right? I mean, SaaS and tech have really grown and scaled a lot since the last Great Recession. And now we're heading into some economic slowdowns. And I think a lot of companies are going to be trying to figure out how they can optimize things, how they can make each of their, resources more productive, more efficient, deliver bigger results with essentially less, right? So I think it's cool because I think you're going to have a front row seat to a lot of that, which is like, okay, if I'm trying to understand how to make the sales reps better, get the messaging better, use marketing to help, convey the brand better in the sales motions and engagements, but then also understanding the customer's point of view, what works, what really, what's the crux of the problem that we solve. I think they're going to continue to be really important insights for a tech company in 2022 and beyond, right? Because they are going to have to figure out how to get tighter on everything. So I think it's really cool. I think you're going to so I'm very long on the sales enablement role in all of this, which is being able to be a liaison between all these different things and, helping to provide the resources that sellers need to continue to be successful, even if there's less buyers out there, or it's, harder to get approvals and things like that because of the way the macroeconomic is. So very cool. Question for you. What do you say to someone who says, those who can't do teach? And I hate to use that because it's super negative, but maybe someone has said that to you at some point in your career, in enablement, that is, your career in enablement, like, hey, you're doing that. Shouldn't you just go into a rep role and carry a quota? Because obviously those who can't do teach. That's part one of the question. Like, has anyone ever said that to you? And how do you respond to that? And then part two is just, how do you stay fresh with the actual art of selling or the skill set of selling when you're no longer carrying a quota and working with prospects to close deals every day?
Yeah, no, that's hilarious. Nobody's ever actually said that to me. I feel like it's something that I've always been like, I'm ready for it. Like, it's gonna come one day. So you're the first. Thank you.
And I ask it hypothetically.
Yeah, sure. Actually, one thing you said earlier, I never really considered it. It's so obvious, but like you said, I come into this with no quota and of course a lot of other responsibilities, but like an ability to come in and be an outside perspective almost sometimes, which I feel like there's a lot of value in that, and something I've been thinking about since you said that a little bit ago. But I've also, since I've been in enablement, have come to appreciate the specialty of it. I think it's just so interesting to me. There are people that study for, years and years, the science and research behind adult learning and, so many components that, again, from stepping out of the SDR and SDR leadership role and moving over to enablement, I remember having a little bit of a perspective of, oh, well, when I was at Medallia, well, I did the SDR role, I did the SDR manager role. So I am very comfortable with training on those things because I felt like such an expert. And I think, like anything else, when you're starting a new job and coming over to my current role in Whoop, everybody's going to have imposter syndrome, right, at first, and be like, all right, well, I haven't done that here. So what does that mean for me now? And I think leaning on the specialty of, just like I described, how to kind of translate what you need to sales enablement and being able to be, again, that translator and being able to deliver things in a way that are going to help people apply things to their day-to-day and change behavior, and almost viewing enablement, again, not just as training, but as change management, I think is really key to be able to understand that it's just a completely different specialty than anything else. And I think it's also, you have to have the humility to say, I don't know everything. And like you said, stay fresh. And I am obsessed with, and I think all enablement folks are obsessed with continued education, rightly so. Like that's kind of the field we're in, but I love listening to podcasts and following people on LinkedIn and reading and going to webinars and constantly learning different best practices. And I think, that it's so important for not only for sales enablement, but for anybody in a sales role. I feel like the best way to learn is to collaborate with each other, especially with sales, right? Like, there's no prospecting Bible. There's no right way to do everything 100% of the time. It's all about experimenting and trying different things. And I think between collaborating and then even just like feeling the other side of it sometimes, like I found the best way to learn and kind of stay fresh in terms of what's great specific to prospecting, for example, is to notice how I feel and my reaction when somebody's prospecting into me for an enablement tool, for example, and paying attention to things like that. I feel like on top of research and continued education for myself is really important.
That's a good point. Because you can continue to do education, network, listen to podcasts, but you're also, you can also look at some practical things and for example, a prospecting email and say, how does this stand against what we're doing here? Is this an email that I would want to receive if it were one of our reps sending this out? Right. So I think there's a lot of ways. I totally agree. And yeah, again, that question was more coming from like a devil's advocate standpoint, because I don't want to say I've ever heard anybody actually say that, but I'm sure it's a thought that pops into people's head when they're like, oh, that person decided to go down a sales enablement career path. Maybe maybe they didn't want to stay on the course of being a field sales AE or strategic AE or whatever the, long-term vice president of sales goal is. Right. But I think also to latch on to something you said too about quotas, I think quotas can be, I'm not advocating getting rid of quotas. I carry one and have carried one for practically the entirety of my career. Right. But I do think that it's sometimes hard to focus on like sharpening the tools when everything always ultimately, everything is always ultimately comes down to like how well you do against your quota.
Yeah. And
so
every minute is really important to focus on that. Right. And again, I think that's something that it's important from the enablement side to recognize that and go, okay, if that's what I'm fighting against, it is a specialty, right? Like how do I fight against that effectively and make sure that I'm delivering something that is impactful long term, but that's also going to make someone feel like, okay, this is going to help me right now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is really interesting. And I'm a big believer. I think that it's a great investment that a company makes in this role, because again, you don't have that foggy vision from a quota. You're not solely focused on that. So you can kind of stop and be more strategic about everything versus just constantly, running against a revenue number. What would you say to like an early stage startup founder or sales leader who feels like they don't need sales enablement because they're too small, too early?
Yeah, I think a lot of that goes back to what I said before in terms of thinking about sales enablement or, revenue enablement as training and certain topics versus outcomes you're trying to drive. I think enablement these days has such a key role in, delivering outcomes for products that you're releasing or updating or process, and all of that is in addition to skill development and professional development and leadership training and all of those other great things that enablement can do. And I think Whoop is actually a great example, and it's actually what attracted me to this role in the first place. Is, it was a new enterprise side of this business, and they were growing the sales team, and initially saw we need to invest in enablement, and that was one of the most important things to me, that they weren't waiting to bring it on later when they realized, oh, hey, now we need enablement. I think a lot of people are recognizing that more now, but I think it still is an issue where they don't realize, like, if we are experiencing hyper growth and we are an early stage company, we're going to have a lot of product updates. We're going to have a lot of process improvements left and right, every single week, if not more often than that. And you need an enablement partner to do those things. And again, it goes back to driving change management and being really effective with how you roll things out to a team, and being intentional about it. And that's something, again, I really appreciate about my experience here, is that they saw that investment early, and that the stakeholders here recognize it's a lot more than just, hey, we need a cold call training, and it's just about the topic, versus, hey, we need to drive towards certain outcomes and drive change management.
I'm curious, is there like a sweet spot in a SaaS growth curve from your experience so far? Is there a sweet spot when, actually, better question, is there a point in a SaaS growth curve where you're too late if you don't have a sales enablement person coming in? Like, is that when the team reaches like 300 people, you're behind the curve? Maybe you've never even given any thought to this question.
Yeah.
I'm just insanely curious.
No, I love that question. Yes, I think that's a phenomenal question, because I don't think it's about the amount of people. I think it's about where you're at. And if you are really accelerating with a new product, and there's going to be a lot that goes along with that in terms of updates and releases and changes, and you still have a lot of work to do. I think, again, like, the misconception could be, hey, we still have a lot of work to do in terms of putting processes in place and getting the foundation here and building the team. I think that's when you need enablement, is before you do all of that, right? And to be a partner to all of those people that are laying the foundation for a team versus anytime after that, regardless of the amount of people that you have there already.
I think that's a really good point. I think so much of SaaS, especially over the last decade, and as I said earlier, I think things are changing in the industry. I think we're going to see a lot of change, especially over like the next 18 to 24 months. So mark my words, and we'll talk again in 24 months. But what I think the like MO has been, it's been very reactive, right? Grow the SaaS company at all costs, raise as much funding as you can, get deals done however you can get deals done. And the strategy and the, the like intentional aspects of business will just come later, right?
And we'll figure out what we need. Yeah.
Right. We'll figure it out as we go. That's, move fast and break things. That's a very common mantra in the tech business. I remember, just to anecdote on this is, and I'm not going to name his name, but there was a founder I worked for that felt like it was too early to bring marketing in. I was like, what are you talking about? How are we supposed to generate demand if there's not a marketing team? And I've worked for a handful of founders that just were, it was either too early for this, too early for that, too early for marketing, too early for sales. And I never understood the logic, but the logic is just that. It's, well, we'll cross that bridge when we need to. And I'm thinking,
and those are the people you want on your side, right? You want marketing on your side. You want sales enablement on your side. You want those people that are, are going to know those areas better than anybody else.
Right. So I could see a scenario where in the future, again, not even just the next 18 to 24 months, the model in SaaS changing from here going forward, because maybe founders and business leaders in tech start to think, why don't we just hire one or two sales enablement people first? They can assess our, product market fit, and they can determine the messaging, by working with our marketing team and marketing resources, and they can, massage that messaging until it's sales friendly, and it can be put into outreach sequences and turned into, decks and things like that are going to be needed. And why not invest in that first before, investing in the actual reps? But I know the model right now is, especially for early startups, it's hire 2 reps and get them selling somehow with no resources, just by the, I don't know, by whatever like means they have to get a deal done. Just, I don't know, email against a spreadsheet full of email addresses or something like that. And trust me, I've been in that seat, so I know exactly what that is. But I could see a world where the first line of defense is bring in sales enablement pros to build the foundation, and then go and hire, your 2 to 4 AEs and your 4 to 8 SDRs, and then scale from there. Because once you have the foundation built, it's gonna be a lot easier to build the house on top of that, right? So I hope so. I hope that's the way that it goes. I think that'd be really interesting.
Me too. Yeah. I think, so much has changed already since I started in enablement, but even since I started in tech in general, I feel like it's so different already.
Yeah, it really has. And I think the biggest changes are coming in the next couple of years, because everything's going to be completely different. There's just not as much capital as there has been available, and probably won't be for a while. And that old model of move fast and break things, grow at all costs, figure it out as we go, is probably not going to fly anymore in the the future. That's what I think anyway.
It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about, so you're obviously looking at trends, you're looking at the industry, the sales, culture, because it's a whole culture too. Tell us about some of the things out there that you're seeing that are like faux pas, or not like, just not professional, or some tactics that might be ready to be retired. Tell us about some of those that you've seen recently.
Ooh, that is an interesting question. Faux pas. I feel like I don't see many faux pas because they probably go right to my spam. But I do. Every once in a while, I actually do check my spam folder in my inbox to see what's coming in there. And there is so much that is getting filtered out now. So if you're, a seller, an SDR, anybody that's reaching out and you're sending high volume, very generic things out, it's probably going straight to spam if you're not seeing opens. I think that's a lot more so than I've seen before. Filters are getting better. I think on the flip side, like, there's so much research into what works. And again, like I said before,
Mm-hmm.
there's no prospecting Bible, there's no sales Bible, there's nothing that's going to work for you 100% of the time. I think it's about experimenting and trying different things. And even when you and I spoke the other day, just collaborating with people is huge, because there are so many tactics now that you can honestly forget about something. And you mentioned something about reaching out to procurement teams that I remember running several campaigns to procurement back with my SDR team when I was a manager, and it being so effective. And when you said that the last time we spoke, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that. Why am I not doing that again? And sharing that with everybody. So I think there's just so much out there that you can do and try, that nothing's going to work 100% of the time. Also, nothing is never going to work, So I think getting really obsessed with understanding the trends and learning and following people on LinkedIn that are going to share those things, and listening to podcasts and asking your friends and your coworkers and everything. I think that's a really great way to learn. And then also feeling what it's like on the other side and digging in a little bit more to what I mentioned earlier, feeling the other side of it. I think one of the best ways that you could learn, if you're a seller and you want to know like what it feels like to receive a prospecting email, whether you're getting them or you can find people at your company that are getting prospected into, or having even those later stage conversations and getting feedback from them. I think there is so much that is missed in that. It's actually something that our sales development leader and myself do all the time now. It's become like an obsession. It's pretty fun. Like, it started out as us, we just were forwarding emails to each other that we were getting. So for myself, like, okay, here are different enablement tools, and for himself, things for sales development. And we started sending them back and forth, but then we started almost getting obsessed with, okay, they sent you this email at this time and they sent me this one at this time, and here's how they changed it. And then they called you and then they sent me this message on LinkedIn. And it got really interesting, and it's become this regular discussion that we have now with the team of not only, what the cadence looks like, but how it makes us feel. And I think that that's something that has been really transformative, is having conversations about, okay, when they said this to me on the phone, or when they sent me this in an email, this is how it felt for me to receive this and to read it. And here's what I would change. But then also flipping it on them and saying, okay, how would you change this to be more relevant to me? And I feel like that really helps reframe it for people from selling a product into, here's how you talk about value. And also, just even if you throw all of that aside, here's how you just make that human connection. And I think it's so obvious sometimes, right? Like, talking about them and not yourself. And it goes out the window when you need to hit your quota, or you need to hit a certain activity metric, or you're just focused on so many other things that you forget something that's so human, to like make those connections. And it's something that I've seen, just even again, like reminding people to do things like that can really make a difference. And to have those discussions about like, hey, I feel entirely different when you change a little bit of language here.
Can I say that is so awesome? For years, I've had sales leaders, founders, CEOs of the companies I've worked at forward on, bad prospecting emails or a good prospecting email. But I can't say that I've ever heard of anyone go, like, I didn't realize enablement, or at least in your case, I don't know if all enablement reps and leaders are doing this, but you're like going through and looking at what time they sent and what channel and comparing it to others on your team. That is super cool. Someone should productize that somehow and turn it into like a sales analytics tool, because that seems very interesting. Did this email, maybe the messaging was fine, but maybe because you sent it at midnight my time, I now think you're an asshole, right? Like, there's probably some element to that. Or, you sent it to me 5 times on email. I didn't reply because it's not interesting. And then you bomb my email box, or I don't know, you direct text me or something, whatever the channel is. I think that like time of day channel to also, what did you say to my team versus what did you say to me? Like, I don't think I've never heard of anybody tracking that or looking into that further, but I would definitely read a research paper on that topic and see, what trends are out there. Maybe it already exists, but that is super cool.
Well, and even to get more crazy here, I even said, I think it would be really cool as an SDR or AE that's prospecting into a company to start to pay attention to, okay, these people comment on each other's posts, or they're,
Right.
you know, connected from a previous company. They're clearly, they work together closely, or they seem like they're friends, or they followed each other from company to company. I know they're going to talk to each other, right? And when I
Yeah.
think about that scenario with the SDR leader here and myself, like, we never worked together. Like, people from the outside might not know that, but if you can gather some sort of information, like, oh, these people know each other, or, you know, they might be in the same office or sit next to each other, and I want to incite some sort of conversation about myself and my company and my outreach here, I think that would be incredible to intentionally do something like that to get people talking.
That's super cool. Yeah, that would be so interesting. All of that stuff affects, you know, it really does. It affects the successfulness of a campaign and the effectiveness of an outreach sequence. So, man, we should productize this.
Yeah,
Or
seriously.
if anybody out there can figure out how to build that, do it. I think
Yeah.
companies would buy that for sure as a SaaS.
Yeah. And I
Insights
think
into
even,
who's who. Yeah.
yeah, I think even what you said, like you said, you've had different leaders at different companies forward along things. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's something key to that. But then I think the discussion around it, how I felt, what I would change, I think that's really key. The other thing that I think people can benefit from is you can use that as leverage to learn about different personas, right? So if
Yeah.
you are, you know, you're in a company and your main target is the marketing persona, and you've never worked in marketing, you know nothing about it,
Mm-hmm.
get close with your marketing team, ask them what they're getting. Like, that's an opportunity to understand the people that you're talking to every single day and how to get through to them.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so true. Wow. Oh man. Okay, cool. So no, I've got like I have a bunch of ideas now. This is really now I'm gonna be like especially aware of all of the outreach that I do. You know, in terms of my prospecting, I'm gonna be very thoughtful about time of day, channel, who I'm reaching out to on the team. And you know, in the role that I'm in now, because I'm selling to the enterprise, I'm pretty targeted in my outreach, and it's very it's not as volume driven, it's more quality over quantity. I write
Mm-hmm.
actually longer emails than I used to because they're more research oriented. But that said, there's still a world where volume is key, and I think like understanding what can make that
Yeah.
process all better is really cool. And it sounds like you're down in the trenches with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's always a balance. I feel like it changes where you are, what you're selling. There's just so many factors to it too. You're always towing the line there of volume and, you know, being more tailored and strategic.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask a really big question here on the air. We're coming up
Oh
somewhat on
man.
time here, but we talked about this a little bit off air, which is being a woman in SaaS sales. It's a topic that
Yeah.
I believe it or not think about a lot, because some of my best mentors, some of my best colleagues and peers, and you know, people that have taught me a lot about the business were women. And then I was telling you this in the context of I've had a really hard time finding women. There's been some great women guests that have come on the show, but
Hmm.
it's been harder to get, you know, women to come on the podcast and you know, essentially brag about themselves, because that's part of what this show is you know, coming on and not bragging, but just, you know, sharing what works, sharing what they're doing well, sharing their playbook for success. And I've had a hard time keeping, you know, consistently keeping women on the show, or getting women to come on the show, I should say. So I wanted to just, you know, pick your brain a little bit about it. I don't know that I have like an actual formulated question here. More of just like tell us about, you know, how can we all work together to get more women into the industry? How can we help women be more successful in the industry? What things need to change in the industry? So I'm throwing like 20 questions out here just to kind of start the conversation, break the ice. But
Yeah.
I would, you know, I'll start with just, and I'll end with just saying, I'd love to have more women on the show. I'd love to see more women on the teams that I'm on. I'd love to see more women in sales leadership. I still feel
Hmm.
like that's one of the biggest areas where, when I look back at the last few companies I've been at, I'm not seeing that as much,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And I think it's a struggle. It's definitely a struggle. So I just wanted to kind of generally get your thoughts on it. Again, that wasn't a very like direct question, more than it was just like a semi rant. And yeah. So any thoughts? I guess I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's funny that you say that too, where you're trying to get more women to come on the show too, because I think even when you talked to me about it, I was very excited, but there's also that element of hesitation. Like I know I'm not going to say anything groundbreaking, right? Like there's nothing that I'm saying that hasn't been said before, but I think that, I mean, that also comes with the territory of just technology and the world we live in. And there's so many podcasts and books and ways you can learn. But on the other hand, like I think it would also be hypocritical of me to say no, because like I said, I love learning from podcasts and books and LinkedIn, and I benefit from normal people like me sharing things that even if it's something I've heard before, I might have forgotten, and it might be valuable and relevant to me at that point. But it's interesting too, because I don't know the exact research behind this, but I've heard a lot, like women want to be 100% or more ready for a job before they apply, or 100% ready for something before they do it, versus men are willing to be a little bit less ready for that, or feel like they're, they don't have, everything ready to do it. And I think even just for myself, I was kind of reflecting on that and being like, okay, did I have a little bit of that in me in that moment? But I think in sales in general, I have been really fortunate to have a really, really good experience all around. Like not only I've worked with really great women in sales, like you said, great women, great mentors, leadership, women in leadership in sales. I've been really fortunate to experience that and see it. But on top of that, I think what's really stood out to me is I've been around some incredibly supportive men in leadership that have made sure women's voices are heard, have hired purposefully to make sure that there is representation across the board. But I think the most that's ever stood out to me is when people call it out. Like even just you saying that when we were talking about this conversation that we're having and saying, this is something that I want to raise and that's important. If you're comfortable, like I want to talk about that. That's, I think, bigger than you probably realize. And it's something when I reflect on some of the most impactful conversations I've had with men in leadership positions in sales is when they're asking those questions and having open conversations about it and asking how they can highlight the women on our teams and do better. I think sometimes, people can shy away from those things. And that's always stood out to me when people have said, like, how can I support better? Or, hey, I noticed you were the only woman on that call. Like we just had a call of, a bunch of leaders and there were a bunch of men and you were the only one. Like for someone to call that out and say that and say like, hey, if you ever feel like you need someone to, support you or kind of reiterate what you're saying, or if you feel uncomfortable speaking up in those situations, or we need more women on that call, like for people to start those conversations and ask questions and just bring it up, I feel like makes a big difference to start. And again, I feel like I've had a very positive experience, but I feel like those things have always stood out to me.
Amazing. So it sounds like we just need to normalize talking about it and asking about it and calling it out. That's a whole other interesting animal too, because again, in different points in my career, I saw things that I probably should have said something. And, here I am, I'm going to confess this all on the air. And I'll tell my wife about it later. And she's like, oh, you should have said something. And I don't know why that hasn't been normalized in the culture. Like why, and it's not like, I'm probably making it sound more extreme. They're not like, it's not harassment or anything like that. It's more just women being overlooked, women being talked about in a certain way that like isn't fair. It's not equal. And I'll give you an actual example. I was once in a panel job interview. This is actually before I was at Medallia, by the way. So this is many years ago now. And there was a male candidate and a female candidate being interviewed by a panel, which included, the founder of the company, some other leaders and things like that. And the male candidate was asked a bunch of like questions about, I'm trying to think of like specific questions that he was asked. Stuff like, very practical stuff. Like how many calls do you make a day? What's your approach to prospect? Like stuff like that. And when the female sales candidate came in, they asked her things like, what scares you? It was really weird.
Wow.
And that was one of the first times I noticed it. This is a long time ago now, by the way, too. And I noticed it and I was like, that was weird. They asked a totally different set of questions to her than they did to him. Why? like they're interviewing for the same role, and arguably she was more experienced than him. Like on paper, she was way more experienced. And I remember internalizing that and thinking that was freaking weird. Like, why did that
That's
happen?
crazy. Yeah.
And yeah, so that's just like one example. Or like another is that I've heard, sales execs like leadership say things like, they're going to throw a temper tantrum referring to a woman. And I'm like, and men don't. Like I've seen male AEs.
I've seen
Like,
it.
yeah, we've all seen it. Like it does happen. I mean, so
That's
how
funny.
is that exclusive to gender, right? So it's
Yeah.
very interesting. And we could probably talk for like 2 hours about this. And there's also so many other groups that could be more included in SaaS sales. And part of what I want to do with the podcast too is just give a voice and shine a light on some of those people. It's, the podcast started as just how can we highlight the reps that are doing this every day? Because what I felt like was a lot of the podcasts out there were only highlighting the person who made it to the VP of sales role and, only shining a light on the people that were in that specific seat or role and had made it to that point in their career. And it didn't highlight the people that are doing the job every day. And now I think it's really important to shine a light on everyone else because, even amongst AEs, there's still biases and things like that. And I want to be able to give everybody a seat at the table. I think SaaS sales should be like a big tent thing. I think I've used that term a lot, like big tent, where everyone should be allowed to come inside, right? It shouldn't be exclusive.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think hopefully just talking about this helps someone out there listening to, one, feel more confident in what they're doing in their sales career, but also, I'd love to hear more perspectives from more women on the show, because the way I think about things like podcasting, for example, because I, by the way, also had imposter syndrome when I started the show. I was thinking there's nothing I'm going to teach the world that's not already been heard or said from some sales training or some YouTube channel or another podcast or another sales leader, another blogger, et cetera. Right. But I was talking to someone before I started the show and they said, yeah, but nobody else has been on your unique journey. So nobody else can tell what you've seen and heard and done. No one else has that. That's your unique story. And so I think, hopefully this is a reminder out there to women that like you're unique and you have perspectives, especially in business, because you can see a lot of things that your counterparts can't. And you should feel empowered to share that and be, part of what's going on. And you should feel empowered to take credit for things too. That's, I know, a big deal. Like, and to your point earlier, like it's easier. I think it's easier, generally speaking, for men to take credit for things, or, jump into a role without being fully confident they even know how to do it. Right. And yeah, that's, I think, just something we need to keep airing out and speaking about.
Yeah, no, I love all of that and totally agree. And I think, again, like I said, the moments that stick with you are when you have those moments with men in sales, men in leadership. Like you even highlighting this in some of our conversations had me start thinking about, what am I doing with Women in Sales Month in October with my team, and started sparking some ideas there. So have to give you credit for working on some of that and raising it. And again, those are the things that stick with you. And I appreciate you bringing that up and starting the conversation. And even though like I can say I've had a very positive experience, I don't think that's the norm. I think there are a lot of challenges, and even just getting into it, like we were talking about getting into tech initially, but getting into the workforce and getting into tech as a woman, and in a sales role, we're still seeing a huge difference in not only who's filling the B2B sales role, but who's filling leadership roles too.
Yes.
So it's something that still needs a lot of work. And I like having personal experience with it through my sister. She is a primary caretaker, got back into the workforce a few years ago as a CSM, actually at Medallia.
Nice.
And just seeing her experience with something that probably otherwise would have been really difficult to have to go back into the workforce, but having the opportunity to get into in a CSM role, but like still with more of like that account management flair and like having some of the sales role there, and started out in an SDR role when she got back in. But I think it's something that would have been so different if it wasn't for the tech industry, for B2B sales and those opportunities that I think present so much opportunity for women returning to work too, like her, after, you know, being a caretaker for a few years. And even outside of that, like I said, just the growth in sales roles and leadership roles and what we're seeing in terms of like, I mean, women are closing more deals, hitting higher quota than men. Like, there's some really great things that I think people are finally starting to recognize, and
Absolutely.
some of those leadership capabilities too that I think it's a good, going into October too, it's a good time to have some of these conversations, not only about the challenges, but some of the great things that we're seeing from women in sales.
Yeah. Like, very generally speaking, of course, but from the women I've worked with in this profession, they're very organized. They're very strategic. Mm-hmm. They're very good communicators. They're empathetic, which is actually one of the most underrated skills, especially in enterprise selling. I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, that's so true. Like, we're not often taught that empathy is really that important, but when you think about selling to a group of people at the enterprise level, when you're selling to sometimes like 8 or 10 people, depending on the deal cycle, right? There's a whole group of people that has to be involved in an evaluation of a big ticket sale in SaaS. And if you're not empathetic to each of those personas and roles, then you're not going to get the deal, because odds are, if you're just kind of a thick-headed, you know, whatever, then someone's going to say, this person doesn't get it. They're not trying to understand what our problems are. They're not trying to understand why we're stressed out, etc. And I think women are really good at the empathy piece. And since that is really the key to everything in enterprise sales, especially, in corporate sales or commercial sales, right? Any level, but especially at the enterprise, when they're complex deals and there's a lot of people and personalities involved, it's better to lean into that empathy. And I think women are so good at that. So to the women out there listening, please come get in the field. If you're thinking about getting into SaaS sales, come get in. If you're already in, you know, let's go. you're probably doing amazing, and hopefully it feels like that. But we're going to keep talking about it on the show, and follow Lauren, because she's she's going to be posting about it and being involved in it. So with that, tell us just as we kind of wrap up here, how can the listeners get in touch with you, and how can they get connected with you?
Yeah, just good old LinkedIn for me. Connect with me, send me a note if you want to have any conversations based on some of the stuff we talked about today. If you're trying to get into the tech industry, especially, or if you already are and you're looking to get into enablement, I'd love to talk to anyone about that.
Awesome. And then Whoop, how can we walk us through what Whoop is and who might be interested in learning more about it?
Yeah, so it's interesting because both as an individual from the consumer side, or if you're interested from the business side as well, it's got something for everybody. Like I said earlier, product and what I am selling and being a part of as a company has always been really, really important to me. I had a personal tie to Whoop before joining the company, and it's very, very high level, a wearable that monitors your sleep, strain, and recovery. And again, from the consumer side, you can go and get a strap for yourself. But from the B2B side, we're working with healthcare companies, government, business, and athletics. So you can reach out on the Whoop website to buy a strap for yourself, or on the Whoop Unite website if you're interested for your organization. And it's really interesting. It's completely changed my life. If anybody knows me, they know I love wine, and it's changed my perspective on wine a little bit and what it does to my body. So that's a lot. That's a huge change for me. So if you know me, you know that carries a lot of weight.
You've piqued my curiosity, so I'm gonna have to go check that out for myself, because I've been on a big health kick. I guess that's the short way to say it.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I've been thinking about sleep and protein intake and all these other things. So now I'm definitely going to maybe I'll rethink my relationship with wine also.
I kind of recommend it, but it's a bittersweet goodbye. But we'll have a lot to talk about with all the food stuff too, nutrition.
Yeah.